The people and their stories. This is Full Ahead, the podcast about ships and shipping, with Alistair and Nigel Thompson.
We're back in the Full Ahead shed that's had a bit of a makeover. It's changed colour outside. We've moved the exercise bike. We've got an extra chair. So yeah, Nigel, how are you doing?
We're doing really well, I think. And yes, thanks for observing that the Full Ahead shed is now the Full Ahead summer house, perhaps.
Right, a real upgrade then. It's
the green room.
Sounds more romantic than maybe it looks, but luckily nobody can see it, so we'll see how we do. But anyway, coming up in this edition, we're going to hear from an unsung hero, one of the pilots that bring ships from the sea into port.
When I started Heysham particularly, I had a couple of old masters. They sort of trained me up with what they knew and stuff that they'd been taught. And they used to say Heysham was 50 minutes of boredom and 10 minutes of terror. That's how they used to describe Heysham.
Yeah, and we'll be looking into maritime matters, queries from you about the various questions, perhaps the things that perhaps you're afraid to ask, and we can maybe help answer the question. And also we'll scan the horizon, looking at the stories we think may be in the news over the coming weeks and months.
Your look inside the world of ships and shipping. This is Full Ahead.
And one story that's definitely in the news is trade wars and tariffs, and what does this all mean for ship owners? And it will probably mean something different tomorrow than today, and who knows, but we'll come back and maybe cover that in a bit more detail in the next episode. Close to home, over the last few months, we've seen the importance of port infrastructure and what happens when things go wrong. So Holyhead Port, a really important port for the Irish economy, had an issue with one of the berths and was closed. So the port was closed completely for a while and then has recently reopened with a single berth. And this was actually discussed in the Welsh Parliament recently, just really underlining the importance of port infrastructure to shipping in the maritime industry. The damage was caused by storms and, nobody really knows. A key recommendation from the committee has urged the Welsh Government to decide what financial and other support it will provide to local businesses affected, and just underlines the importance of ports to the local economy too. The port closed suddenly on December the 7th, just before Christmas, and didn't reopen for 40 days, really causing a problem for those Christmas presents trying to find their way to Ireland. And obviously it's not just about freight. Holyhead's really important for passengers too, and a huge drop-off in the passenger traffic as well during that period.
I mean, Holyhead as well, you'll know it very well. I've walked down the breakwater. I mean, it's a massive piece of infrastructure. And it was a real shock, I think, to many people that Holyhead, such a crucial port on the Irish Sea, was kind of just basically closed. That was it. So Pembroke, I think, did very well. They kind of boomed. But as regards kind of way around the country, for not just Wales but for the UK, you're talking like north to south instantly. Big change, wasn't it?
Yes, and stuff ultimately will always find a way, but it's made more complicated with the kind of post-Brexit changes as well. So diverting through Northern Ireland, which would have been easy historically, is now more difficult because of the checks and things that need to take place. So yeah, it was a real head scratch for the industry. Yeah, nobody really wants to see that kind of disruption in the industry. Even the competitors of Holyhead Port, they can't cope with that kind of increase in volume either. So a very difficult situation.
It's like a clock, isn't it? It doesn't take much for something to just throw it out of kilter and get back in. I wonder how soon before they are back up to speed and it's all kind of forgotten. I guess it just takes time. And also, I wonder if it makes people kind of plan ahead and make sure that, that they aren't in that position again. As you say, it was the weather that caused these things. You can't predict, I guess, the vagaries of what happens with the weather. But, I suppose it makes people kind of sit up and take notice that, things do break, things go wrong.
Yeah, things absolutely do go wrong. And it's interesting to watch what happens next and how people react. But yeah, look, good to see it operating again in some form. Good to see traffic moving normally. But yeah, a really interesting situation to keep an eye on.
Your look inside the world of ships and shipping. This is Full Ahead.
So let's move on to our main guest for this edition. He's a man we both know actually, and has been a welcome sight on bridges of many ships around the Irish Sea for many years.
Yeah, we did say Full Ahead would be shining a spotlight on those jobs which perhaps don't get the attention they maybe deserve, and this is no exception. Imagine going to work, the office, on a boat. You have to rendezvous at sea and scale a ladder up the side of a ship, which you may never have even seen before. Well, that's the job of Andy Bradbury, a pilot charged with bringing ships safely into or out of port. He's been telling me a bit more about the job.
Messing about in boats with various their uncles that weren't actually uncles and things like that. So I spent a lot of time in small boats around the River Wyre. Then when I started thinking about career, my dad used to talk. He was a teacher by trade, and he used to talk to me quite often about what do you want to do when you leave school, what's your job plans. And I'd grown up messing about in boats. I loved the sea. I used to watch the old ro-ro ships that used to run out of Fleetwood. They used to come in 3 times a day. I could hear them from our house. We can hear the whistles and the engines and clattering and banging as they were loading. So I think at some point I must have mentioned I wanted to go to sea, and I don't know whether they weren't too impressed or what, but they arranged for me to go for a week's trip on a coaster out of Glasson Dock. I was 13 at the time, and you wouldn't be able to do it nowadays, but they paid the skipper some money for food for me for the week, take me away and on a ship and put me off going to sea. I think that was the job brief. And after a week, I absolutely loved it. The crew were great. They took me under the wing and we worked hard, and I loved it. So in a way, that sort of spurred me on to work harder at school. And by that time, I knew what exams I needed to get, and I wanted to be an officer at sea. And that was it. That's how I got into being at sea. And then I was deep sea for 9 years. It was deep sea, long trips away, and I got fed up with 4-month trips away. I did a couple of 6-month trips, and my girlfriend at the time, she's now my wife, she was getting a bit fed up with being away so much. So she said, "What about ferries?" I really didn't want to go on ferries because I thought I'm going to be so bored. Same 2 ports, in and out, twice a day, not for me. But I agreed that I'd do some agency work and during my leave from deep sea, and I really enjoyed it. Every day's different, the wind's different, the tide's different. I never look back, and it's sort of handling ships is the enjoyable part of the job. And very quickly I was chief officer. We had to get PECs as chief officer, so I was straight in with the ship handling with some old experienced masters teaching me what they knew. So that was it. I was a ferryman, and after a few years I was promoted to master. The next 7 years I was master, sailing out of Heysham, mainly out of Heysham. I did go to other ports, but Heysham to Warren Point in Northern Ireland. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and I really enjoyed it at that time. Kids came along, got married, kids came along. And 2 weeks away from your kids is not so bad. I used to see them at the weekend. But there was a pilot at Heysham. He kept saying to me, I want to retire. When are you going to come? There's been a great job for you. Come and have a look. And I kept saying, no, I'm happy. I'm not. No. Anyway, I ended up. I started doing trips with him he was also pilot at Glasson Dock. So I went doing a trip or 2 during my 2 weeks off, and I really enjoyed it because they were completely different ships to what I've been used to. I kind of realised I probably was getting a little bit bored. I was used to the same ships and the same ports, and they were completely different ships, meeting new people, meeting different nationalities, meeting completely strange ships, and very quickly trying to work out, what's the ship going to be like, what's the captain like, how's it going to work out, and then you get off. So you do the interesting part of the job, you tie it up, and then you get off and you go home. And you don't have to spend the rest of the day hunched over a computer filling paperwork in. So all of a sudden, my quality of life improved a lot because I could tuck up going to the gym. I saw the kids every day. Sometimes it would only be in passing. It would only be, see you tomorrow, or I'll drop you off at school and then I'm going to work. But I saw them every day. So in a way, it's a great job. It's the best of both worlds, really.
And tell us, how long have you been doing this now then?
I was piloting at Glasson Dock for, it's coming up to 8 years. I was doing that. Actually full-time pilot when this guy I'm talking about, when he retired, just over 5 years now.
We're talking, overlooking Morecambe Bay, and quite a nice day actually. The sea looks very calm, but of course Morecambe Bay is known for its channels, it's known for shifting sands, so I guess in your line of work, this is something to obviously bear in mind, especially Glasson. People who listen to the podcast may have seen one of your videos where you're weaving through the channel, weaving its way out. Yeah. And you were saying before, with a clearance underneath of, 50 centimetres?
Yeah, Glasson Dock, that's sort of more interesting navigation up. It's the River Loon. It's can be quite shallow at meanders. You've got to sort of keep track of where it's meandering to, where it is. There's quite strong tides, and the kind of ships that we bring into Glasson Dock, they're nothing like as manoeuvrable as the ones that we bring into Heysham. Very often you're looking at the weather all the time, and the tide, that's the main one. The tide is something you can look up any time of the year. You've got your tide tables. You can always say, well, I'm bringing a ship on that date. Well, it needs to be at this time to have enough water. We're always looking at how much under keel clearance, as we call it. And as you say, we work on a minimum of 10% of the draft, which sometimes can be 50 centimetres under keel. So, we can be mud hopping, as we call it. Yeah. But the thing is with the job, safety is always the number one consideration. So each job, each ship, you're looking at it from the very word go. Is it safe for me to get on it? Is the weather going to be too rough for me to? Because we go out in a pilot boat, obviously, and we meet them 7 miles out into the bay, and I'll climb up the side up a rope ladder up the side of the ship. So sometimes the weather's not suitable for that. And then once I'm on board, we're looking at the wind and the tide and using it to your advantage, or taking that into account, basically.
It's quite a challenge though, meeting the skipper for the first time, dealing with a crew you've never met before, a ship you've probably never seen before. Are you sort of doing research before you go out, perhaps googling the name of the ship and trying to give yourself a bit of a head start? Yeah,
I mean, we're very lucky this day and age. We've got, like you say, we go on Marine Traffic or various websites, so I can always get a picture of the ship up. More often than not, I can go on the company website and download information about the ship. So I've got a rough idea of what it's going to be like. But yeah, I mean, when you join a ship at particularly night time, and the captain you've never met before, you've no idea, and very quickly you've got to form a rapport. The quality of their English might be anything from perfect conversational to negligible. You've got to form a rapport with him. You've got to give the captain some confidence that I know what I'm talking about, and vice versa. You're all the time you're sussing out, what's he going to be like? Because it's a teamwork basically. I'd say well over 90% of the jobs we do, we will manoeuvre the ship and we'll put it alongside, and the captain's just there assisting. Occasionally we'll get a captain, he'll want to manoeuvre his own ship, which I can quite understand, having done that myself. But then we have to be sort of sussing them out as well. Do they know what they're doing? Are they, And it can be. And I think it was most difficult during coronavirus, because we were boarding ships that they'd come from Europe when it was particularly bad in Europe, and it wasn't so bad here. We were boarding ships that had come from Europe where we were watching the news, all these people dying, but we were all masked up, and you don't realise how much communication is facial.
Sure, yeah.
And you're masked up, you've got a massive language barrier more often than not anyway, and we're keeping away from each other. You haven't even got the good firm handshake when you get on board. Hello captain, how you doing? Yeah, have you had a good trip? And there's none of that. And one of the ships I brought in at the height of it had the captain standing outside on one bridge wing, the mate standing out on the other, and I was in the middle steering the ship. And I don't think we said we did the basic safety handover and what have you, but apart from that there was very little communication.
That's really hard, isn't it?
And I thought this is and night time as well, I thought just want this coronavirus to go away, because it's been making the job very difficult.
It's very possible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what about going to and from Glasson? Because people may have seen the River Loon, and especially at low tide, as you say, there's more sand than there is water. So trying to negotiate that, especially on a ship that you've never seen before, with one engine, probably no tugs, that is a real challenge, isn't it? especially given that the vagaries of the weather and just other things like you say, coronavirus and the fact that the cargo itself, everything that all these different things that you can't really plan for until you actually get on board. It's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those, it's an unusual job. On the face of it, we go out on a boat, we jump on, we bring it in, and that's all we do. But there's so many more aspects to it. We keep abreast of where the depths and where the channel is. Occasionally we'll actually walk down the river at low water. We'll carry a GPS in our pocket and we'll walk along and we'll get a plot of actually where the river is. We'll take visual cues as well, so when the tide's in we know where the deep water is. And it can change, and I think it's sometimes affected by how much rain we've had, the fresh water coming down the loon, that can affect it does meander. The other thing as well, when we go out to a ship and we get on board it, more often than not, I'm the first contact that ship will have had with the United Kingdom. So although we've got people like the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency whose job it is to inspect the ship and check it's safe, once we brought it in, it's very often too late. I'll go on board a ship and I'm thinking, is this ship safe to bring in? Am I going to tell him to stay out and go to anchor? Is this engine going to stop on me halfway up the River Loon? And all the time you're sussing out and you're taking the cue, you're listening. If there's a argument going on between the captain on the phone, is he arguing with the chief engineer because the engine's not working? It is, all these little things you're trying to pick up on, and it's all a risk assessment basically. That's how we do it, and it's you adapt to it. It's a rolling risk assessment, and safety is number one priority.
Have you had situations where you've got onto a ship and you're actually thinking, doesn't feel quite right, the engine doesn't feel as robust as it should, the weather's going to change, and actually it's my decision not to bring it in, because that is a big decision to make.
It is.
Time and money.
And it's one of those, the difficult decisions, and how I've always done it, and how I never lose any sleep over it, is I completely ignore who owns the ship and who owns the port. I imagine that ship is my ship, the port's my port, the cargo's my cargo, and I make decisions based on that. And I always think that you try and make the right decision, but you make the right decision based on what information you have. And we've been out to ships, and we're quite lucky now. We've got a good source of weather, so it's very rare that we get out there and we say, the weather's too bad. We normally tell them in advance, well, tomorrow the wind will have died down. But I've been on ships and we've said, no, you need to get that fixed before you come in. It's not, we don't want to bring a ship in that's going to break down on me with one engine. We need it. So it is a difficult decision, and you're not the most popular person, but I'm looking at the two ports that we work for. They always support us and back us up, and they also know that we're not looking for excuses not to bring ship. We want to bring ships in. We want to keep commerce going. So for us to say, I'm not bringing that ship in today, there's a reason for it.
This is Full Ahead.
What part has technology helped when it comes to bringing ships in, especially in your time? You talked before about being on open bridges with no technology. Has it changed now? Has it become easier as a result of things like handheld GPS devices, things like that?
Piloting ships in and out, I think the best thing that's happened to me in my sort of career around this area has been remote weather stations. So I can look at a screen now, look at my phone, you can log onto it, and I can get the real-time weather in Heysham. We use one on Rossall Point, the Coast Watch station, so we know at any time what the weather is. So I can be sat at home knowing that I'm joining a ship in 2 hours' time, and I can look at the weather station and think, it's a bit windy or whatever. The same with the tide. We can log on the tide gauge. So we've got things like electronic charts, but Heysham particularly, it's the actual navigation coming up the bay is very easy. It's a big wide channel, it's one course. The interesting bit is manoeuvring into the port. So in a way, the electronic charts haven't really assisted that much. You've got electronic charts there, you've got vectors of where the ship's going, where it's set with the tide, but you tend to do it all by eyeball. And that's why, if the visibility is not good, we don't come in. We never come in blind. We always have to see, a certain distance before we'd risk coming into the port. In the case of the River Loon going up to Glasson, electronic charts are good, but you're always looking for the channel buoys, the lights. You've always got the binoculars. So radar, I mean, radar's brilliant because you can pick the actual buoys up where they are. You can see the buoys. You wouldn't obviously go on the position of one buoy because the buoy might have come out of position, it might be drifting or whatever, but you can see the buoys, so you know where you are. So.
And what about in terms of going to Heysham? People I'm sure have stood on the roundhead there and watched boats coming in, and the turn, first of all, it's almost like a 45-degree turn, isn't it, when you're coming into Heysham? Heck of a turn. And with the tide as it is now going out, if that's occurring and it's windy as well, and you've got a decent sized ship, all these things are in your mind. How do you approach that? What kind of cues are you looking for? Or is it things like watching the state of the tide, what colour the tide is, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, when I started Heysham particularly, I had a couple of old masters. They sort of trained me up what they knew and stuff that they'd been taught. And they used to say Heysham was 50 minutes of boredom and 10 minutes of terror. That's what how they used to describe Heysham. But yeah, I mean, you've got to get it right. You've a 90-metre entrance with two big lumps of Victorian concrete either side of it. There's no two ways about it. You've got to get that right. I think it gets narrow at night and in bad weather sometimes. I'm not so sure about that, but I'm told it's not always 90 metres. Obviously, it can be so different because with a flood tide, it's pushing you past the port. We get the prevailing southwesterly winds in the same direction as the tide. So if we have a strong flood tide, a southwesterly gale, everything is pushing you past the port. So you basically end up turning and almost turning back in on yourself. To stem the wind and the tide to keep you in the entrance channel. So it's just something that you have to do by experience. And I was involved training up chief officers as I was trained up. You start them off in good weather, and you say, right, and the next day you say, right, you've a bit more wind today, so just you might need a bit more rudder, and then a bit more tide today, and then before you look round, you're doing the strong winds, but you're always looking at what the wind is, what the tide is. It's quite different as well at different stages of the tide. So at low water, there's the mud banks around the entrance. Actually, the tide's not that strong because it's deflected by the banks. But an hour before high water, you've got the tide actually cutting across the entrance to the port.
Yeah.
So you've got the tide all the way to the entrance, all the way to the stone roundheads, we call them. So you've got to be very, very mindful of that.
I was talking to a recent podcast with the new sand pilot of Morecambe Bay, and he mentioned the river dance, of course, which is to many people still recent history, a modern ship coming ashore, for people who don't know, just near Clevis there, and sadly having to be cut up. So it just shows that even in today's days of fantastic technology and modern ships and well crewed and all the rest of it, things can go wrong, can't they?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I just started working for them at that time, and I was actually on the sister ship. But I was on leave at the time, and to see, I actually parked on the front. Somebody told me that it was in difficulties, and I actually went and parked on Cleveland's front in my car, and the weather was terrible, and they would just breathe a sigh of relief when everybody was safely off and ashore. And you can rebuild ships, but as long as everybody gets off, that's the main thing. Most of all the ferries and most of the vessels going out to the gas fields, they've got pilotage exemption certificates, which means they don't need to take a pilot. But we are involved in the training of these seafarers, so they have to do a certain amount of trips with us, and then we do the exam at the end, ourselves and the harbour master, and we decide whether they're competent or not. And then every 5 years we have to do a trip with them again. So we get on the ferries quite often, and the same with the rig supply boats and the standby boats. But those companies that goes to Isle of Man and Northern Ireland, and the conditions on board, they're good, reputable companies, they're good ships, So we go on those, and then we see the opposite end of the scale. We see the cargo ships that are just chartered for one trip from Southern Europe with some agricultural cargo, and we've never seen this ship before, and I think it'd be fair to say that standards vary, shall we say. But it's interesting seeing both sides to it. Just today I brought in a rig standby vessel. She goes out, she sits off the gas platforms for a month, and then once a month she comes into Heysham and they do a crew change and take fuel and fresh water and stores. With two of those, every month we bring them in, and the end of the day, we take him back out again. So 8 o'clock tonight, I'm taking him back out. Different crew, fresh faces, and that's it. So variety all the time.
And what about the future? I mean, the fact that ships are getting bigger. I mean, the ones that come in now, your former colleagues at Seatruck, I mean, they are probably as big as Heysham can take, aren't they? They're massive. And also, again, the challenges continue, don't they, of learning and still working with big ships.
Ships have got bigger. Heysham Port was built in 1904 with the small steamers. Ships have got bigger and the port stayed the same. But they've also become more manoeuvrable. They're designed and built for Heysham. They're all the ships that all the ferries that are operating out of Heysham are bespoke for Heysham. Most of them are Heysham Max, as we call it, the biggest size that can safely be operated. They're ideal ships. They are, and we'll get used to it, and that'll be it.
And what about the history side of it, of the job you're doing, and also where you're doing it? Because I know you say before, you grew up in the area. Morecambe Bay is your home. We've just been looking at pictures of old ships from years back. So you're the current pilot, and the pilot's obviously before you as well. Do you think about that when you're doing the job that's been done here since Victorian times?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sort of growing up on the wire with some of the old fishermen who are all dead and buried now, and in a way I wish I was a bit older. I could have got some more knowledge from them, and appreciated what they did know and these old stories they used to tell you. I'm a bit of an anorak in a way. I read the books about the old ships and the old sailing ships and that kind of thing, and how they managed to it was just seamanship, how they managed to navigate around not knowing where they were, and the sort of vagaries of the wind and the tide, and it's amazing. It really is amazing, and I absolutely appreciate what they used to do, and I love looking at these old black and white photographs, and just from a professional point of view, just appreciation of how they used to do it. And we're just sat round the corner from Half Moon Bay, and you can't see it anymore, but there's a wreck of the Vanadis, the old sailing ship. Yeah. And you read the story of that, and I think it come from, was it America or Canada with timber? It was going to Fleetwood. It was here. Got the gale of wind and dragged its anchor, and that was it. And it's never left Half Moon Bay. And it's just amazing how they did actually manage to get these things from A to B safely most of the time. You never know it all. There's always something, and the sea can always surprise you.
Have you had surprises? You've been out, you thought you planned it, and then all of a sudden, it's happened.
Sometimes nasty surprises. Yeah. How I always try and do it, as I say, it's all a risk assessment. That's how we do it. That's the sort of methodology. I always try and have a plan B and a plan C, and if I've got these in my brain, if I get to this position and the wind's stronger than this, I'm going to abort and go back out to sea, go back out to anchor, or I'm not going to turn the ship. I'm going to berth it the wrong side alongside, or whatever. I always try and have these safe escapes, and that's how I kind of mitigate that, because with the best will in the world, sometimes you get squalls coming through and it's night time and you can't see, and the wind's dropped down and you're looking at all these fancy anemometers. But a few times I've come into the port and all of a sudden the wind's come from nowhere, and it's been a rain squall, and it's just for a few minutes it can be horrendous weather, and you just have to have these escape plans, and adapt to your plan. I think that's the thing. You've got your plan, but don't stick to it blindly. You've got to think, oh, hang on a minute. And a few times, I've brought ships in and they've not wanted to turn that way, so you think, well, you don't argue with it. If it wants to go the other way, well, you let it. You accept that and you work with it. You don't fight how it's developing. You adapt to that. That's probably the best way to describe it. You never fight with the wind and the tide. You use those as much as you can to your advantage, and adapt it accordingly.
Wow, that was amazing. Such a kind of interesting interview. To think that you go out onto a ship, not knowing the ship, onto a ship where there might be a language barrier. What you do know is the port and
Full
where
Ahead,
you're going, but
the
you've got to bring
podcast
that
about
ship that you
ships
don't
and
know
shipping.
into that port with crew that you've never met before. It's a difficult job, difficult and challenging ports that Andy operates into, particularly with Glasson and Heysham. But yeah, hats off. to Andy. That is a tough role. And actually, I think he's moving on to maybe an even tougher role with a move down to the Mersey now. So from the kind of frying pan to the fire, maybe. But, really big river, really busy place, a different role down there, but still the same job of boarding a ship, climbing up a rope ladder, out at sea and bringing in a ship you've never been on before with a crew you might never have met before. And yeah, I don't think I could do it.
I'll tell you what, some of the comments in the interview, though, that I perhaps didn't include, saying, how do you sleep at night? Do you not worry about what's... He said, well, I can't afford to do that. If I did, I wouldn't be able to do the job. But, even, like I said at the start, going to work on a pilot boat and then, coming back on this massive ship for the first time. He mentioned the Manxman, for example, the new steam packet ship. And he was a little apprehensive about bringing that. I'm sure he won't mind me sharing this with you, because he was saying the size of the ship, but also the slab sides, the way it could be affected by wind as well. So even, when you know the port really well, the fact that the ship is different is the kind, and also the conditions. The tidal flow varies, the wind, the weather, always changes. And I guess having to kind of balance that and being confident that you know your stuff, the patch, it takes some doing, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the challenge with smaller ports is people try and build bigger and bigger ships to fit into the smaller and smaller ports, the economies of scale. And the job for those pilots gets ever more difficult. In the next episode, in the port of Workington, I think we see how a relatively small port is dealing with that. And later this year, we'll be looking at some other ships that are coming into the market that, again, are pushing the boundaries of what you can do in small ports.
Well, now it's time for more Maritime Matters, the part of Full Ahead, when we try and get answers to the kind of questions people like me are afraid to ask. Now, last time we spoke about terminology from ships and shipping that's become part of common language. I mean, we scratched the surface. There are loads, aren't there?
Yeah, the more and more we look, the more and more we find. And I find this bit really interesting because there's so many phrases in the language that come from the maritime industry. So an obvious one being above board. Everything's above board. We all know that one. And that's simply anything above the deck, anything that's in plain view or in plain sight. So everything that's above board, it makes complete sense. But here's another one, Nigel. I think you've got one that might be more relevant for the times we're in at the moment.
Well, this is it, that phrase that's probably bandied around the news bulletins a lot these days, certainly on the radio, at loggerheads. President Trump is at loggerheads with whoever, name the country. Apparently the terminology comes from when an iron ball was attached to a long handle. That was known as a loggerhead. It was heated and used to seal the pitch in deck seams. So a loggerhead was something that was also perhaps a handy weapon for quarrelling crewmen, but it actually had a practical purpose to it. I never knew that.
It sounds like you made that one up, Nigel.
No.
You're sure that's right? I'm not. But yes, it could well be true. But some of these are quite historic, but I think some of these are still used absolutely today in the maritime industry. So tune in for the next episode to hear about some more.
We've got a book full, trust me. We've only got to A.
Good point.
Yeah, now then, let's horizon scan, see what's coming up in the world of ships and shipping. I was reading how MSC Cruises has just opened the world's largest cruise terminal in Port Miami. It's got a capacity of 36,000 passengers a day, which is massive, isn't it, when you think about all those slightly stressed people with their bags and baggage and things like that. But apparently it's the digital infrastructure that will set this port apart. For ferry terminals looking to modernise, this is perhaps a glimpse into the future. You've heard of biometric, perhaps when you go to an airport, the way that it looks at your retina, make sure it's you that's flying and not somebody else. Well, apparently an app-based check-in and facial recognition kiosks are being installed to try and automate and speed up boarding gate. Passengers can just simply scan their passport, look into a camera and breeze through security in minutes. No paper, no queues. It just speeds up the whole process. I don't know about you, but I'm still thinking there's something not quite right about this. I was reading the other day about not needing perhaps in future to use a check-in system on an airline, and you perhaps won't need to print off your boarding thing, but it's not asking too much, is it, to do that?
No, I think it's all technically possible. I'm just thinking about 36,000 people getting on cruise ships in a single day, and I'm not into the idea of cruising. I've never been on a cruise, maybe busman's holiday or something, but the thought of getting on a large cruise ship to me doesn't thrill me. Anyway, the thought of getting on it quickly, yeah, I don't know. Let's wait and see. But we need to do an episode about cruising and go and speak to these cruise liners and see what it's like. Maybe cruising's fantastic. I don't know.
Here's an offer. I'll take one for the team. I'm quite happy to go to Port Miami anytime to just
we have a very limited budget.
No budget.
Have you been on a cruise, Nigel?
I have. Many years ago, I went with a commercial radio on behalf of a commercial radio station when they were into those kind of things, and I went on a Carnival cruise line from Miami around the Caribbean, round to Cozumel, and finished at Grand Cayman.
How on earth did you manage to swing that as a work trip? That sounds very dubious to me.
So. No, lots of interviews were had, with the chef and the captain. We had to go everywhere. But it was fascinating. But I'm with you. I'm not really somebody who can just sit and watch the world go by. It was all right for a day or two. But, you're kind of looking at the world and thinking, right, I want to get up and go and explore, which you did, to be fair. When you went to Mexico and had a cracking time. And a friend of mine's just come back from a cruise to Norway. And again, going to things like Spitsbergen and places like that.
That appeals.
Yeah, because it's only 3 or 4 days from Southampton and back. That's good. My mum is going around the UK later this year as well on a cruise from Rosyth round to the Isles of Scilly and back round. But no, I'm kind of short crossing, kind of half a day, maybe a day is long enough, and then I've got to get off and explore.
My primary issue as I co-host a maritime podcast is that, somewhat embarrassingly, I get very seasick. So that would be my primary issue with cruising, or in fact being on most ships, which some of my previous staff used to find quite amusing.
I think there's a way of beating it though, in this day and age, either through hypnotherapy or just sticking at it long enough. I think we need to find out, the audience, somebody will know a way of beating seasickness.
My way of beating it has been by trying to avoid getting on ships as much as possible, but much as I love them and I love the industry, yeah. So thanks for listening. Please check us out on social media, search for Full Ahead, and you can also find the details of how to get in touch on our show notes.
Thanks for listening.